What's going on, everyone? Nick or Catalyst here. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. Today I want to talk to you all about maps, specifically the maps in Battlefield 5, and to be even more specific than that, I want to talk to you all about why I think Battlefield 5 maps are poorly designed and why they can get boring so quickly. Like many other things in the game, the maps in Battlefield 5 in comparison to past titles have received massive downgrades in quality, and in my opinion, I find the design of these maps to be on average quite lazy. Now, I don't want to pretend that I'm some master of game design or that I myself could code and put these maps together by hand, but I am a seasoned Battlefield veteran that has been playing for 10 years, and I have been playing during the franchise's highest highs, and I'm currently playing during its lowest lows, so I'd like to think that I have a pretty good scale and idea as to what is successful and what is not. That is not to say that the maps are a huge problem in the game right now, because I'd argue that implementing a working anti-cheat and a good team balance are more important issues, but beyond that, I think player boredom is also a huge issue in Battlefield 5, and it's going to get even worse now that the content has been delayed due to a certain pandemic. Boredom is one of the main reasons why the game has not been able to keep a consistent player base, you know, apart from all the other reasons, but regardless, let's get into it. Grab some snacks and a drink, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a long one. Oh, and one disclaimer. Everything I'm going to be talking about today can apply to some maps and not apply to others, so when I'm speaking about a certain issue or topic, even though I'm talking as if it's a universal issue, please keep in mind that every map has its own set of problems and issues, so please try to keep that in the back of your mind. First, I want to discuss the idea around big maps in Battlefield and why that dynamic is not as strong in this game as it is in others in the past, and why I think too many people mistakenly think that just because the map is big, it means it's a good map. When the Pacific Theater content dropped for Battlefield 5, people hailed the new maps, Iwo Jima and Pacific Storm, as some of the best maps in the game. It was a return to form for Battlefield, and there was many a Reddit post of people praising DICE for bringing large-scale battles back into Battlefield 5. Now, normally I wouldn't reference anything from the Battlefield subreddit considering the amount of asinine things I see in there on the daily, but during the time I saw plenty of these posts praising maps like Al Sindan, Iwo Jima, and Pacific Storm for being the full-scale war experience that Battlefield 5 was lacking. And based on all of these posts, it confirmed to me that the current Battlefield player base has a very misinformed perception on what actually makes a good Battlefield map. Now, keep in mind, what you don't and what you do like in a Battlefield map is completely subjective. But with that being said, the idea that just because a map is big or is grand in scale, meaning it's a good Battlefield map, is in my opinion inherently misguided. It's not the size that matters, and I know that we men have been saying this for centuries, but I state again, size doesn't matter. Battlefield maps weren't great just because they were big. Battlefield maps were great because they were versatile and diverse in all aspects, in addition to their abnormal size. Now, you'll notice that the last sentence was said in past tense. Battlefield maps were great. This is because I don't think that Battlefield 5 has many good maps, and as we'll get further into this video, I hope to explain why, but for now, let's continue on with this train of thought. Perhaps people really do actually like maps like Iwo Jima, Al Sindan, Hamada, and Panzerstorm, but I keep coming back to this notion that the scale makes the map, and I can't help but think that they are focusing on the wrong area. It's not necessarily the size, it's what you do with it. A good Battlefield map is large, but also interesting and multifaceted, offering unique and varied gameplay in all three stages, infantry, armor, and air, and it's the latter that I think Battlefield 5 misses wide of the mark for a couple of reasons. When the three separate stages work together in harmony, there is no other experience on the market like Battlefield, and the game truly feels like a fleshed out experience. The problem with Battlefield 5 is that rarely do these three stages ebb and flow together like they're supposed to. Instead, they operate almost as if they were completely separated. Out of sight, out of mind. Have you ever been playing a game of Battlefield 5, you are strolling around and casually come across a tank and say, Oh yeah, I forgot there were tanks on this map. Or a plane crashes to the ground out of nowhere and you say, wow, I forgot there were planes on this map. And while maybe you realistically would never forget that they're there, you can go an entire match without coming across any planes or tanks, and this happens more frequently than I'd like to admit. Sure, maybe it's because the current player base seems to have no hair on their balls and they like to camp with their armor away from the action, but truthfully, it's because there is very little interaction between the three stages, and when there is interaction, it is often a quick threat that comes and goes without warning. You can go an entire match on Eris, for example, forgetting that there are planes until you get strafed by a pilot and die in seconds. It leaves you with this feeling of, well, that just happened out of nowhere, and not only is that frustrating, but there is really nothing that you can do about it, and you more often than not will move on with the match and not see the plane again, unless that pilot is really, really good and you just get killed over and over again. Battlefield 5 does a really bad job of delivering on its strongest sales pitch: large-scale battles with engaging gameplay in all three roles: infantry, armor, and air. Instead, it's large-scale battles in which all three aspects interact every once in a while, unless it's literally shoved down your throat with a map like Panzerstorm. It's like having a Venn diagram of the three types of gameplay, but having little to no overlap. Instead, the three rings are barely touching, and that's the rare gameplay moments where the three stages come together and form an experience like we all know and expect to receive. There are a couple of reasons for this. Obviously, DICE is limited to what they can do due to the time period that the game is set in, but I think the bigger issues stem from our old pal Attrition. Battlefield veterans will note that in past Battlefield titles, all three aspects were aware of each other at all times, and there was this great duality and harmony between all three roles. You were always subconsciously aware of planes, helicopters, and tanks as an infantry player, and you would do your best to equip yourself to deal with threats as they came. As a tanker, you were always looking out for the AH-17 or engineer classes or other tanks, because if you weren't aware, you were going to get yourself killed very quickly. There is very little of that dynamic in Battlefield 5 because of Attrition. Breaking this down role by role, tanks, for example, they have to go out of their way in the heat of battle just to resupply and repair if they don't have a willing and competent support player nearby, and even if they did have a repairman, they still would have to go and resupply every once in a while. The result of this is that tankers tend to center their entire playstyle around those resupply stations. For most tankers, this means playing not too far away from a resupply station in case they get in trouble. This causes tankers camping on the edge of maps, away from danger, sniping for kills, and not playing the objective, or even worse, playing in the same areas of the map pretty much every single round, and that is boring for all parties involved. As far as planes are concerned, it very much so adopts the idea of lightning in a bottle, and interactions with planes in Battlefield 5 are quite like lightning strikes. If pilots aren't dogfighting, they are doing strafing runs, but because of Attrition, even when they are strafing, they aren't a constant threat. Drop your bombs, or fire your rockets, fly back, and resupply. Drop your bombs, fly back, resupply. Drop your bombs, fly back, resupply. It's a constant cycle that makes planes feel absent from the entire battle a lot of the time, especially when you have lackluster pilots playing against you, or when the balance between different factions' planes actually come into play. You could argue that this is a product of the setting, and not having helicopters to diversify the aerial combat hurts the game, but truthfully, even Battlefield 1 had more attentive air-to-ground combat. A good attack plane could absolutely dominate a lobby if the opposing team did nothing about it, and because there was no attrition in Battlefield 1, pilots in Battlefield 1 were a constant threat and required players to act accordingly. In Battlefield 5, planes are coming and going, oftentimes not contributing to the lack of spotting, and I find that you didn't even know they are there until you get randomly bombed by one. On the other side of things, Fliegerfaust often cause quick deaths for pilots, and this is all to say that Battlefield 5 games can be very one-dimensional, and if you play one-dimensional enough times, it gets boring. And that should not be happening in a game that is advertising multi-layered, large-scale combat. Is Attrition realistic? Sure. Is it a boring video game mechanic? Yes. I also think that Battlefield 5 has a severe lack of quote-unquote Battlefield moments that really make these playable areas and maps shine. For those of you who are veterans of the series, do you remember back when Battlefield 4 was being run on ads, and DICE made a whole bunch of those ads of players describing Battlefield moments? Here, I'll give you a little bit of a refresher in case you've forgotten.
I was running from a tank. It misses me and blows a hole through the wall in front of me.
The driver panics as he drives off of the building. So I'm parachuting from a helicopter which is exploding behind me.
All of a sudden I see concrete coming in all around me.
I just see 10 people rushing for the bomb. It was way too epic.
And then all of a sudden I see wind, clouds, and waves start coming up.
And the ship broke loose and crashed into land.
I didn't even know that was possible.
Now, of course, this trailer got memed to death when Battlefield 4 had its disastrous launch, but that's not important here. The important thing to note, the things that these players are talking about, driving a four-wheeler off the sea flag of Siege of Shanghai, those truly were quote-unquote Battlefield moments. It's that sandbox feel that is very lacking in Battlefield 5. The difference is, apart from Levolution, most of the Battlefield moments were made by player creativity and interaction. The more casual of a gaming experience Battlefield becomes, the more these Battlefield moments become manufactured for the player instead of created and lived by the player. What do I mean by this? Well, think about it. What's the big, jaw-dropping gameplay feature that Battlefield 5 has to offer players? The JB2 and V1 rocket. These are accessible to all players after a fashion, and while although the players do earn it, it's still a manufactured gameplay mechanic by DICE that was created to replace and fulfill the lack of sandbox gameplay in organic fun that Battlefield 5 has. The rocket strikes and artillery barrage, when you think about it, are supposed to be jaw-dropping immersion-building features, but after a while, these features become dull and sometimes they can be on the verge of annoying. You will even see the early roots of this in Battlefield 1 with Behemoths and Elite kits, both things manufactured by the game for the player that try to deliver these jaw-dropping Battlefield moments, but they ultimately fall stale after a while because they aren't organic. Seeing a V1 rocket explode after 700 hours of playtime is kind of meh, but shooting a plane out of the sky with a tank shell, that never gets old. And as if all of that wasn't enough, when you get down to the nitty-gritty, Battlefield 5 maps are frankly lazy and sometimes poorly designed. You see, there are three main design types for Battlefield maps. First, we have the landmark maps, maps with gigantic landmarks and structures that are integral to the main map design, such as Devastation, Twisted Steel, and Aerodrome. Secondly, you have marathon maps, boring maps with large areas of traversable land between points, such as Al Sundan and Iwo Jima. And finally, you have the meat grinders, which are maps that are chaotic in close quarters, and basically they're in the game so you can shoot a bunch of things, such as Merida and Operation Underground. Now, out of all of these, I personally find the landmark maps to be the most disappointing maps in Battlefield 5 because they are really lazy in their design. Now, if you recall, I said that a good Battlefield map, in my opinion at least, is one that is versatile and interesting to play. Landmark maps in Battlefield 5 try way too hard to get the interesting out of the way in one go, hoping that large and enticing areas will draw in players and facilitate the map's flow. DICE kinda just hopes that if they place a gigantic structure in the middle of the map, players will go, "Ooh, look at that big shiny thing," and flock towards it. And for the most part, players do just that, but that tends to also be the problem with these maps. Twisted Steel is by far the biggest perpetrator of this. Here you obviously have this gigantic bridge that is quite impressive and admittedly is really fun to fly in and under the bridge and fight from cover to cover on the bridge, but other than that, this map has very little to offer players, and that's why in my 750 plus hours of playing this game, most of my games on Twisted Steel revolve around trading the B and the E flag between the two teams. But you need to ask yourself why that is the case, and the answer, at least in my mind, is that the rest of the map just isn't interesting. Again, it all comes back to this central idea that a good Battlefield map is versatile and interesting, and apart from the bridge, Twisted Steel is a snooze fest to play. The entire map is covered with swamp that nobody wants to cross, and when you get to one of the exterior flags on the map, not only are they usually unguarded because everybody is playing elsewhere, most likely the bridge, but the objectives honestly all kind of look the same. The A and the C flag use a lot of the same assets, and honestly, apart from the silo on the A flag, if you put the two objectives side by side, I'd wager that they are almost identical given some discrepancies between location of assets and the size of the objective as a whole. 2 barns, 2 houses, some boxes in the middle, maybe a gun emplacement, and a bridge connecting them. As a level designer, I'd think that you'd want to make every objective on the map as unique and interesting as possible. You want players to travel across a map to different objectives for different gameplay experiences, not just huddle and Zerg rush in the same big area over and over and over again, which is why I call some of Battlefield 5's map design lazy. It's okay to have a huge landmark set the setting of the map. In fact, I encourage that you do that, but you need to make the rest of the map just as interesting to play, or otherwise, you will get a lot of maps like Twisted Steel, in which a lot of the other flags hardly trade sides because nobody likes going over there, especially when you can get ambushed by a camping MMG Bush Wookie, but that's not really DICE's fault now, is it? You'll see sparks of these problems in Aerodrome as well. Apart from the gigantic hangar in the middle of the map, the rest of Aerodrome is aesthetically bland and disinteresting, and while admittedly all the plane carcasses and oil fires are really cool, very few players play around those areas because it's very easy to get pinched, and as a result, the entire top part of the map, this stretch of land between the B and the F flag, it oftentimes goes completely unused except for stray snipers and tanks who are cosplaying as snipers. It's a risky venture to try and flank that way, which is why most people stick to the middle of the map between the C and D flag, where if the game is evenly matched, the match will kind of stay. Devastation is a map that, in my opinion, does everything correctly when it comes to executing a good landmark map. Here, of course, we have the Cathedral, which is the main draw of the map, but notice how every other single point on the map is unique and diverse in their own way. The Cathedral has a host of gameplay opportunities. You have the theater objective, the bridge, the library, the garage. Everything is different, very little is duplicated, and as a result, I genuinely do not mind traveling to any objective when I am playing Devastation. You have examples of successful landmark maps in past titles as well, such as Siege of Shanghai and Battlefield 4. Sure, everybody wants to be on that gigantic skyscraper in the middle, especially when it falls down with Levolution, but all of the other objectives surrounding the landmark are fun in their own right as well. The best Battlefield maps are the ones that keep the player engaged with diverse, interesting objectives that bring out the best in all 3 stages of combat. Maps like San Quentin Scar, Caspian Border, Tehran Highway, Zavid 311, and so on. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the marathon maps like Panzerstorm, Hamada, Al Sundan, and the Pacific maps. We've already spent a lot of time talking about the connotation of big maps in Battlefield, and especially in Battlefield 5, so we're not going to spend too much time here. But big doesn't always mean better. I understand that different maps want to deliver different experiences, but if that experience is boring, then what's the point? And that's exactly the problem with these maps most of the time. I think DICE, especially in the case of Iwo Jima and Al Sundan, rely on the historical significance of these locations to facilitate engagement and interest in the map, and in pretty much every case, it falls flat. Far too often you find yourself running aimlessly back and forth between objectives just to run back and cap them again before you get shot by a DMR from miles away because there's no cover, and even if you use transport vehicles, you are still going back and forth between objectives, and that can get boring quickly. So oftentimes players huddle around the 2 closest objectives and fight it out until the match is over. That, in my opinion, is just a gigantic waste of space and potential. Of course, I'm sure that file size may have something to do with it, but imagine for a second Iwo Jima or Panzerstorm or Al Sundan if DICE added either more flags or more interesting objectives and cover. And I hate to break it to you, DICE, but adding weather effects as a substitute for making the game feel refreshing, it doesn't do that. It kind of just makes the game annoying. I also find it really odd that DICE so far hasn't really even tried to tweak with the map design in Battlefield 5, and I get that they probably have had better things to do and more important things to fix, but I recall Suez in Battlefield 1 being worked on repeatedly to improve the experience of that map, and it ended up being an okay map in the end. If DICE took the time to rebalance and add additional design to some of the deadweight sections of these maps, their playability would increase by quite a lot. I think a good test on how good the maps are in a game is how well they play on different game modes. Now, obviously certain game modes are going to play better on certain maps, that's to be expected, but I think there is something to the fact that most maps in Battlefield 5 work best on only one specific game mode, sometimes two. We've been talking a lot about the Pacific maps today. Well, the Pacific maps are only really enjoyable, at least in my opinion, on Breakthrough, and even then they have their complications. It really does feel like DICE is designing with one game mode in mind initially, and then just rashly making design decisions to implement the other game modes later. Experiences like Vigel on Team Deathmatch are absolutely horrible now due to the design changes they made on that map, removing all the flanking angles and turning it into a cluster. Vigel is a map that I consider to be only playable on Conquest now as a result. Inversely, I take a look at Hamada and say I have my best experiences playing Hamada on Team Deathmatch and Squad Conquest because Breakthrough, Frontlines, and Conquest put me to sleep better than taking a couple of pills of melatonin. Now, admittedly, it is hard to judge these maps based on all their game modes at once, since staple game modes such as Rush, Frontlines, and Domination are limited time game modes now. But if you take a second and think about the playable areas for each map, ask yourself, how many maps are used to their fullest potential and provide a good experience for all game modes? Maps should be playable on more than just one game mode, and the mark of a truly good map is recognizing that each game mode makes a different part of the map shine, not exposing how boring the rest of the map is or how it's designed for one or two specific game modes. All in all, I hope this kind of brings some insight as to why I think Battlefield 5's maps have the tendency to be boring. Of course, the elephant in the room is the team balancing, and of course the utter lack of any kind of balancing by DICE for Battlefield 5 definitely hampers these maps. But beyond that, the missing sandbox aspects of Battlefield and the lazy design of some of these maps make an experience that is more boring than it is rewarding. That's the end of the video, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below. If you agree or disagree, tell me what you think. Like the video if you haven't done so already. Subscribe if you are new here for more Battlefield content. Turn on post notifications, and I can't stress that enough since YouTube's notification system isn't working properly during the moment because of the virus. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch, join my Discord, and most importantly, thank you for watching. My name is Nick or Catalyst, and I will see you all another time.